Welcome, everyone. We have the weird people. Dan from Weird Book Club is the expert in weird literature, and Derek is just weird. Hey, how you going?
Doing well. Thank you for having me to the show. Long-time listener, first-time guest.
Yeah, well, it has been a while.
Yes, thank you for also coming me back into the realm of book discussions on YouTube.
We got to get you back into doing content somehow.
When I'm going to do less and less.
Derek, I am not disappointed in you because you're coming from a very realistic place of needing to care for your family, which I greatly empathize with. But also, aspirationally, I was like, but he's the one that's like keeping up this furious pace of book reviews, and I'm over here like, I don't have the time or the energy, blah, blah, blah. And now you're slacking off, and what hope is there for someone like me,
Yeah, and I don't know how I'm going to slack off if I do it once a month, because then it'll be like a 45-minute video once a month too. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know.
I did think. I watched it and I thought it all flowed well, but also I did end up thinking like I want to hear more about each of these books. So
Well, that's good. Yeah.
It's a little teaser, a little taste, keeps them coming back. Quality content.
I haven't watched Michael's wrap up yet for Women in Translation, but I was surprised to see a wrap up. I'm assuming it's because of Women in Translation Month, right?
It is. It is.
Yeah.
I don't like wrap ups because I feel like you don't give enough time to the book.
Yeah.
I was stoked to see that you also enjoyed Breasts and Eggs.
That was a great book.
If I ever do get around to recording again, that's going to be the first review that I do.
Really?
I have this. Yeah, it's it definitely I think it would qualify for this conversation about weird literature. Not to jump ahead or anything, but it's just like a different. I think the Murakami endorsement is way too much weight in terms of he has that big prominent cover blurb, and there are certain elements of the pacing and the sort of focus on like everyday incident that do feel somewhat familiar, but I mean you just put that against the fact that like how many Japanese books period are being translated into English each year.
Yeah,
I think they did correctly identify a writer who would have it wouldn't feel like totally unfamiliar, this the stylistic choices that they're making. But in terms of like the subject matter, character development, the use of like slightly surrealistic imagery and stuff like that, I mean, it's so much more grounded in like material reality. And I said this jokingly on Twitter, but I really sincerely meant it. It was like, I have never thought about having breasts more in my entire life. And I mean that in like the best possible way. I'm just like, why is there not more novels focused on like having, different body parts? And, there are so many about the penis. And we all
it's prominent.
Yes. And the mere fact that I was like, you know what? I've read so many dick books. They're all the boob books. And I never realized what I was missing until I read that book. And it just, the extensive descriptions of nipple maintenance routines in the first third of that, I was just like, this lady, she has a compelling argument. I mean, I understand why there's some sensitivity around, standards of female beauty, but also like she's really thought about this. She has a plan for her nipples. She is executing it well, and I can't help but respect it. And I felt similarly about the rest of the novel. But sorry, I feel like I'm talking too much.
No, it's good. So I haven't read that. And the Murakami thing, though, so I read a ton of the Latin America stuff, and they use Bolaño to sell every single book. Like, you know what I mean? Like, every single book is like either this person was friends with Bolaño, or like, did you know that like they speak the same language as Bolaño? Like I think that like Murakami, it's a little bit of that. But Murakami, like, I don't even think of him that often. But when I tell people like outside of a book realm or whatever, like, oh, I like to read translated literature. If it's not Gabriel Garcia Marquez, it's Murakami's like the second person that someone will ask about. Like someone who, like, let's just say like would read like, the Pulitzer winners or whatever. You know what I mean? Like, or like whatever, the National Book Award, like a decent reader, but just not somebody who like, leaves the country as far as leaves English speaking very often. So he just has a bigger presence than I realize, I think. So for marketing purposes, you got to use it.
There's actually a book coming out, and I'm not going to do, I think it's coming out of Soft Skull Press. And I think it's called something like What We Talk About When We Talk About Murakami or something like this. And it's supposed to get more explicitly into the process by which he became this kind of international literary phenomenon. I had heard like certain details about it. Sorry, I'm going off on like a huge nerd tangent. So
that sounds pretty interesting, because I am interested in like what comes in front of us and what doesn't, and especially what comes in front of like more casual readers and what doesn't. So that is I think that'd be interesting.
Like one thing that I had heard floating around ever since I was an undergraduate, which is, let's not talk about that time, but like even so, like 1Q84, which I think was like fairly successful in the States, abroad. I actually have not finished it. It's the one Murakami novel I have never finished. It was originally published in like several small volumes. And then each translation was sort of combined into a single long narrative, and also that there were like many editorial decisions made. I mean, this is all coming secondhand. I don't know enough Japanese to verify this, but allegedly there were these like kind of expository reminders of what had happened in the previous volume, since it was being published serially. And those were edited out of like the American release. So there's this whole background discussion going on about how he was sort of cultivated to become an international success. There was some like editorial decision making behind the scenes about what would appeal to an American audience who's consuming this as a single volume versus a serial produced work, which is like, it's how interesting is it? It all depends on the level of nerdiness. It struck me, and there's this whole, why is he as big as he is? Like, I don't even understand like what the crossover appeal. I genuinely really like a lot of the Murakami that I read. I read it, over a decade ago, so I don't know how I would react to it now, but. So I don't think he's like a talentless hacker or anything like that, but I don't necessarily see what the normies identify with, and his narratives. I don't. Yeah.
What about the other Murakami? Have you read Rue?
I will, because the other video I've planned and still haven't recorded is about how I'm going to review all of the Akutagawa Prize winners, of which he is one.
Okay, yeah. That'll be interesting.
That will be.
There was a story that my friend told me in undergraduate. Man, I was really cool when I was they had meant to pick up a Haruki Murakami. It was like their first thing. They got coin locker babies, only seeing Murakami on the spine. And they were like, what the fuck is this? It's like, I think he continues to have this legendarily disturbing presence in my consciousness. I still haven't read it.
I think he'd fit in well with weird literature.
I think we get along.
What is weird literature? I want to have that talk. I want to know the answers. Because,
Someone look it up.
Because Michael, you said something about like I can't find books. Last night when I was trying to pull books, I felt the same way. I started looking at my shelves and I was like, I've never read a single weird book.
They're all normal to me.
Yeah. Well, you become very self-conscious when you try to define something as weird, because then you're like, nothing I read is weird enough.
Gonna freak you out, man. Yeah, it just become like it's like one of those things like cool. Like if you're calling yourself cool, you're not really cool. If you're saying it's not really weird, you know.
Yeah.
But you have a definition, don't you?
Why, yes, I do.
Such a good host.
I felt like as a guest, even though I'm talking way too much, and I'm really sorry. I just have a tendency to ramble.
Go for it.
So just like cut me off at any moment, interrupt me. Otherwise, I'll just keep blabbering. But anyway, shut up, because I'm going to tell you something. So like the name of my channel, the Weird Book Club, was just a total joke starting off. It's based on like a book club I started with my friends that I've known since 6th grade. And, you know, we had been not estranged, but, you know, you grow up and you don't really know all the details about each other's lives anymore. But, you know, for some reason or another, we'd be exchanging book recommendations every now and then. And usually the one that prompts you to say something to someone is the one that like really, I guess, sticks with you or kind of messes with your head a little bit. And so when we were like we were talking about starting a book club and like, what should we read? There was some list on like, you know, one of those many websites, Book Riot probably, that was like 100 weird novels. So anyway,
I looked at that list.
There's some good stuff on there. I mean, it's all under consideration. TBD. But
I didn't think it was weird enough.
Yeah, I often think that about their lists. Sorry to the Book Riot editorial staff if you're listening. You know, we're way cooler and edgier than you.
It didn't even include this.
That wasn't in the really. When we first started talking about doing this, we talked about putting a moratorium on even talking about the story of the eye.
Yeah, I've got the book here. I'm not going to talk about it.
But specifically because it's like the obvious pick. I'm surprised. I'm just surprised that. But the Book Riot stuff, I like Book Riot, but sometimes I wonder with any list thing how much of that is publicity driven. You know, which is like fine. Like
all of it.
If you can make money in any part of books, do it. So like, I'm not at all. I'm not bashing the hustle in any way. But I don't think there's much money in Bataille. You know,
Bataille Estate will be calling you up.
Hey, I just bought a couple of Batailles, so there must be money in it.
Well, I told you before we started. This came today. Sacred Conspiracy. This is the internal papers of the Secret Society of Axophal and lectures to the College of Sociology. And right before we turned on the camera, I said the reason that I got it was because after I read Story of the Eye, I thought that was just pretty good pornographic weirdness. And then I learned there was this whole philosophy in it. And I was like, I missed all of that completely. So I listened to a couple podcasts. That's like my go-to to learn something. And anyway, it just kind of led me down to this, but I never got it because it was kind of expensive. And plus you're like, I don't know if I want to read a bunch of lectures. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not really.
I'm not here to learn.
Exactly. Not like, okay, I was just curious for a minute. But for Independent Bookstore Day, I was browsing the books at Riff Raff, and I was like, you know what? They've got this here. I'm going to get it. I'm going to get into and it's funny that it showed up today since we're talking weird. But I can't. I've only read the preface, so I can't give you a book report.
It's like a sign. But the next episode of this discussion will be Derek indoctrinating us into the secrets.
I'm down.
So what did you take weird to mean?
Okay, yeah. Definitions.
Yeah.
Specifically, to me, it's also like a luxury to have this term that's like deliberately ambiguous and like you just weird means anything I like in my own personal life. But I do think it's interesting to have like a definition to like kind of compare and contrast your own experience to. So I was doing a bit of Googling, and there's a theorist named Mark Fisher, who, I mean, I can't speak to any level of expertise on his overall body of work. I've only heard his stuff come up specifically in the discussion of like the title of weird literature, because he has a book called The Weird and the Eerie, and he's now passed away. So this is, I think, maybe even this book was published posthumous. Anyway, he does posit a definition.
Okay.
And even within the weird, this is an interesting thing because it's the weird and the eerie, right? So there's not even like a solid totalizing definition of weird. It has to have some other element to contrast itself against. So he says that the weird is constituted by a presence, the presence of that which does not belong. So some kind of experience in which, you're going about your normal day-to-day life and some extraordinary presence happening, action, emotion, just destabilizes your whole sense of what is possible maybe, or what is normal. And by contrast, the eerie is constituted by a failure of absence or by a failure of presence. There is something where there should be nothing, or there is nothing where there should be something. So, I mean, those still sound, deliciously vague enough to
Yeah.
get many interpretations. But I think the thing that I got most out of my Google research was that weird is such an experiential descriptor. Like, it's not necessarily an inherent quality of the book itself. It's really more of your reaction, your what strikes you as weird or destabilizing, or something that should or shouldn't be in a book. It's so personal to you and your general ideology that, like, I like that it brings in the emotional element, because I feel like a lot of literary analysis leaves out the fact that you are a person in the world, setting aside time, sitting down, experiencing a story, having a reaction to it. Like, yes, you are gaining lessons and themes and, but at the same time, like, just that like visceral reaction quality to it, I think that's valuable to examine as well. Like, so many books just have this like totally, I value authors who can achieve that like what the fuck quality. Like, I had no idea what's going to happen, what is going on. Like, I have this sense that there is a master plan, but I was not expecting that at all, kind of thing. Like, I love that in any art form, but like, I feel like literature just because it's like a more nerdy and cloistered art form has had historically more license to just like push people's buttons and try weird shit. So I don't know. My TED Talk is concluded.
Your TED Talk was very good. I do like the experiential aspect of it and thinking about it in those terms, because then it allows you to actually define weird based on expectations. And I think that's where it is for me. I mean, and my expectations might be totally different than yours. You know, like, and I think that where I find a lot of things that are called weird, and we'll go back maybe even to the Story of the Eye as an example, like that's pornographic. It's interesting and it's good. But just because it's dealing with a transgressive subject matter does not necessarily make it weird to me. I typically find something is weird when it does something narratively to surprise me. Like, you know, the function of the narrative, like, goes in a direction that I was not at all expecting. That to me is usually weirder than if the content is transgressive. Like, I just read Dennis Cooper last year for the first time, and I really liked it. It was really good.
It wasn't the slots.
It's not weird though. I mean, to me, it's not weird, I guess I should say. Like, I mean, it's drug-addled love stuff. Do you know what I mean? Like, in youth, and it's blazoned with that kind of like passion and recklessness that you can only feel. It feels like at one aspect of your life. But I felt pretty at home with the characters and with the stuff that was going on. It felt very similar to a lot of situations that I found myself in. So it wasn't, does that make sense? Like, it wasn't weird to me. It was just really good writing.
Yeah. Well, let the record show that Derek Main thinks that murdering twinks isn't weird. So. No, I get what you're saying though, in terms of like, there is almost like this established definition of like transgressive literature in certain like circles, which is like, of course, it's like just violation of taboo after taboo. It's got to be violence and sex. And, you know, there's a level in which, when someone like deliberately labels something weird, you're like, oh, it's going to be one or the other or some combination of both. And that's why I guess it is a little bit more displacing when you have something that can unsettle you out of seemingly neither of those ingredients or a much more subtle implementation of them, I guess.
Yeah.
Do you have any examples?
Who's this directing to? You know I have examples.
Do it, Derek.
Prove it.
Okay, I'm going to go for my first example. I'm going to go with something completely non-transgressive to make my point. This is Seven Samurai Swept Away in a River by Young Moon. It's a really tiny volume. You can see it's like beautiful though. This is one of the deep developed ones. And so this is a South Korean writer. I've read two of his books, Vaseline, Buddha, and this one. And what makes it weird is that there's not anything to it. It's not really a novel, but it's not like a memoir. It just kind of starts and then goes. It's almost like he takes you and he just places you here for some period, maybe like 2 or 3 days of his life or whatever it is. And then you just like meditatively like float along with him. So for this one, his presumably Deep Vellum, his American publisher is in Texas. And so he comes from South Korea to Texas to stay for like 2 weeks. And this is just like him with his only understanding of Texas is that there's some famous murders there and that everyone has guns. And he just goes into his Texas experience as a very weird, like avant-garde South Korean writer who's like, okay, I'll just go to this bar and meet a Texan, like very purposefully. And it's weird because none of the things that you'd expect to happen, and nothing really happens. And so his writing is weird in that sense. And the reason I picked it out is, like I said, because it's the opposite. There's nothing transgressive about it. There might not even be a curse word in it. I'm not sure, but and it's not scary. It doesn't have that shocking quality. It's just weird. It's just weird that it's a thing. It's weird that it's good. It's weird you're allowed to do that. I think a lot about that in terms of reading. because in whatever like feeble efforts when I try to write, sometimes you'll read something like that and you're like, well, I didn't know I was allowed to just do that. And of course, like I can't.
You would have.
Exactly, or else I would.
That's a good point in terms of like a lot of the reading experiences that stick with me most, I feel like are very similar to that, where you start off just kind of going along with it for whatever reason, and you're like, why are they doing this? And it just kind of accumulates and starts to make a kind of sense to you. And you're like, I guess you really can say something by doing this, and they seem to be doing a good job of it. So, I mean, like, good for you. And I think it's like those experiences that start to make you question how constrained the form of the novel tends to be.
Yeah.
Why aren't there more random lists of things in the middle of like a descriptive paragraph? I mean, you got to have like the confidence and the swagger to pull it off, I guess, and an audience and the means to support yourself and every other reason why it should be impossible to create a work of art. But it's just impressive when it all seems to click together like that. For sure.
Yeah.
Which brings me to my more talking too much. I think that this was, I'm a bro.
Yeah.
I'm coming.
Gorgeous.
This was like a novel I first encountered via my like library's free, audio and ebook app. Had absolutely no clue of the author's reputation whatsoever. I just wanted to. I think I just finished Dune, and I was like, I want to read another really long book, and I definitely quit on it at some point because the narrator in the opening section is like this super pretentious young dude who's like, my family is making me study law, but I want to be a poet. And there are these like super
literature.
And there's this like super radical transgressive poet group that he's drawn to. And there's this section where I still remember I was like falling asleep, and he's talking about how he read a poem about a vampire, and he thought it was so erotic that he was like masturbating to it. And I was just like, all right, let's see what happens next. And then like the majority of the novel is absolutely nothing like that. And it just has like so many different voices, and it has this like quality of like I'm a reader who like as I'm listening to the narrator describes, I'm like questioning like, so why did they draw that conclusion about that, or why are they describing this like this? And I always felt like that there was, especially in like Bolaño's works, that there's this, he like almost is like reading my mind. Like, I anticipated that you would ask that question. And here's another character who is like making a seemingly unrelated observation, but that kind of speaks to that thing that you were thinking about like 200 pages ago. And, it's that kind of quality where you start to think like you're reading way too much into this, or the author is a genius and you are the only person who was smart enough to uncover the key. And I think of it so fondly now because not only it had that quality of like, you're just going to do this, aren't you? You're going to keep doing this over and over for no apparent reason, and yet I'm going to keep coming along with you. And it was definitely a book that I had been on a huge reading lapse for like many years, and that was one that I'm really excited to start reading. So I always have fun.
Yeah, you have. I mean, 2666 is one of my favorite books, and you have the definitive review, in my opinion, on YouTube of it. That's probably how I found your channel. But he does something in that one similar with characterization with the German author, where it's described. The German author is described like through other people's eyes at first, like so well that it becomes this like such a strange character that you want to like actually meet and know, as opposed to just hear other people's apocryphal tales of. But he does a great job with myth, in his characterizations. Like, everyone feels kind of like a legend.
I told you Derek would get all excited about that book.
Yeah, well, I had the same experience. He busted me out of a big reading slump. I mean, it wasn't a big fiction reading slump. I mean, but there's only so much, depressing, the leftists can never get it together books you can read like in a row, where you like want to go, where you want to go to fiction. And I read it when I was 30. I got it as a 30th birthday present. So just like 6 months ago. And
who gave you 2666 as a birthday present? And
that was Savage Detectives. I immediately went to 2666 afterwards. So I actually read them back to back the first time, which I wouldn't. Yeah, that was a lot. But I've reread them both since. I think 266 is much weirder. But it's hard to say how much of that would not be weird if he had lived long enough to finish it. Because I don't know if other choices would have been made. Like, would a circle have been more complete and therefore like less weird? But what you got, Michael?
I went with something sensory. I don't know if you read this one. Paradise Rot.
I haven't. I've heard about it. I haven't read it.
I do like her music, but I have not read it yet.
Yeah, I assumed you probably know her music. What's so weird about it is, like, the story is pretty basic about living in this share house, but she describes the mold growing on the walls, and the mold's so bad that like mushrooms are growing from the mold in the bathroom, and it's just the weirdest, disturbing image of a bathroom that I've ever read.
But I love those moments that, like, you're not going to forget that. Like, when you think about that book, you think about that bathroom. Like, you're back there.
Yeah, speaking of weird places, bathrooms, man.
Yeah. So is the story itself fairly straightforward?
Yeah, fairly basic. It's a good book. It's just that image of how the house is so abandoned and so not well looked after is what really stuck with me.
And I think another of her books is being translated. Maybe.
Yes.
Do you know what it's called? I can't. I heard.
No.
I heard things, and then I was like, "Oh, I should have read her book," and forgot about everything. Also, Michael, to take up your thing, Natasha translator. Sorry, I forgot to mention that.
Yeah, I didn't mention my translator.
Look at that.
I was doing that.
Idris.
My translator is Yuan Young.
Yeah, well, I try and keep the habit of naming translators because they do good work.
We don't get it without it. Yeah.
And actually, Natasha Wimmer, I think, have you read Space Invaders, Michael? I know Derek has.
Yes, I have. It was a good book. I didn't include that in the list. It just caught my attention because it had Natasha Wimmer as a translator. Like, it's a level of like pseudo celebrity. Yeah, I probably have a list of translators.
Yeah, she's up there. Sophia Hughes is one for me, who Michael's had on his podcast. She does Latin American literature and is. I mean, if she translates, it's gonna be great. I think she had 2 on the Booker long list this year, which is like
she did.
It's crazy. Yeah, but yeah, Weimer's definitely like that. Chris Andrews, I mean, he probably made his name right with a lot of the Bolaños stuff. Seems like he's got a ton of them. But yeah, there are a few that like they pop up regularly. Megan McDowell is another one from Latin America that's like a superstar translator.
Yeah, at one point we'd have to do an episode of just talking about the translators that we would automatically buy.
Yeah,
because I think there's a huge list of those.
All right, I'm going to go next, and I'm going to go with my one untranslated literature.
Oh no!
Yeah, this is in English. That's right. And
What's that?
I put on Twitter before, if anyone could guess, Michael said he didn't really pay attention to my tweet, that I would send this one out because I do happen to have an extra copy. But
you know how much it costs to get to Australia?
Well, it's Wittgenstein's Mistress by David Barkson. Have either of you read this?
No.
I actually have for my in real life book club. Yes, I have.
That's awesome. Okay.
I think it was one of the first books we read. Anyway, go on.
I've never, so I think it ties into what I said about like narrative, like surprises. I've never seen somebody be able to do that. Like, I mean, it's like each thing, I don't know. It's like, all right, in the beginning, sometimes I left messages in the street is what it says on the cover. And that's the first line. And then through the book, in little snippets, is a woman who seems like is probably alone in the whole world, like the last person potentially, and her going mad, also simultaneously maybe coming to grips with that. But throughout all that, there's a lot of artistic sort of things going on about just kind of culture, right, and society, like little tidbits that she's kind of remembering and noticing from her life. But what makes it incredible and not just like a normal experimental novel is that it works at the end. Like at the end, it actually comes together to be this fully realized thing, and you realize that it did have a full narrative, even though like as you're reading it, you just couldn't imagine that there's anything narratively quite going on. But the great trick, I think, is in the last like 15 to 20 pages, he sort of wraps it up in a way that it comes back in, and you realize that he did. There's a story that was happening this whole time that at least I, as a reader, the first time I read it, missed in a nice way. Like that thing we were talking about like wanting to be super surprised. Like I don't think another book surprised me as much as this, in that I thought I was reading like little snippets of a woman going mad. And certainly it kind of is that, but it also, there's a full narrative within it. Really good. He also wrote The Last Novel, or This Is the Last Novel, which is a great book as well. But this is the classic. That's the Dalkey Archive. This is the one that I will give away. The reason I have 2 copies is because somebody recently gave me one. But that's a book I will give to people if they're like, what should I read or whatever? Like I think it's really, really great. So did you like it, Dan, when you read it?
That was one more I felt like an appreciation for, and we probably should have. I don't want to spoil anyone on Wittgenstein's Mistress, but like I want to hear more about like how the ending tied it together for you. Okay. Because I mean, maybe at the time it struck me more, but I don't recall it as vividly as you seem to. And the thing I remember most about reading that book is like constantly Googling all of the classical artwork she was or the narrator, but author Markson was referencing. And there's definitely the most memorable bit to me was it almost felt like a graduate thesis on like cat representation in classical art forms. Like there's a big cat thread. Yeah. Like there's almost like an internet message board quality to like the association and this like specific personal investment that the narrator seems to have, and why they appreciate these things for is like, yes, serene beauty, but also cute kitties. And so I mean, it was definitely, I was intrigued by it, but I didn't it didn't like stick with me as much as it sounds like maybe it did with you.
Yeah, like it emotionally resonated with me. And in fact, there's a famous David Foster Wallace essay on it, speaking of Brolit. And I don't even like or necessarily agree with the essay, if that makes sense. Like there's intellectual aspects of the book that's not what I was into. Because that has more to do with like what David Markson's doing with the philosophy of Wittgenstein through the sort of snippets and what can language do or not do and what can we express. No, I thought it was like an emotionally power puncher of just like a story in a book. But
yeah, I think a lot of introductions suck like that, to be honest. Like, you take the most, like, I don't know. I always think of, here, I'm going to push up my glasses. I always think of a Susan Sontag essay when I'm thinking about this. But, and I'm not smart enough to even recall the title of this essay. It's very famous. I'll link it or something. Someone will do this in post. Michael, fix it in post. But, basically, her argument is like people are the dominant trait of literary criticism is like this. I must find the maximum amount of content within this piece of work, and there's no space given to like that experiential quality we were talking about before. And when you approached someone who does strike you so emotionally, viscerally, like you were saying, Derek, this novel did for you. And then you go back and read the introduction where it's like, and this is really a reference to this other thing, and blah, blah, blah. It's like, that's the most you got out of this reading experience? Like, it didn't strike you any more than some, like, coded allusion to, I don't know, some that's letter. Exactly, yep. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly it. I mean, I just recently reread The Adventures of Morel, and Borges does the introduction to that. Borges is one of the best writers ever. It's a terrible introduction. I mean, it's just an intro, so I'm not going to kill it. But, like, it is 2 pages of basically, like, this is a good book you're about to read. And, yeah, no shit.
That's all you need to know.
Yeah, but like, it's like, why is this even here except for the, I understand back to the beginning of the discussion, the Murakami. I understand why it's there, for the marketing aspect of it. But it doesn't add anything to me. That particular intro doesn't add anything. David Foster Wallace actually does interpret it, but it's, and I think the Sontag essay might be called On Interpretation.
You are smarter than me.
But the whole idea that I don't know, it bothers me. The interpretations would bother me of something, just as you were saying, that you feel that emotional burst on, like, I like literary criticism, but the first thing I don't want to do is, then go back and read the intro and learn about the connections. But
I mean, actually, it's funny that you were talking about the Borges introduction, because I recently read Labyrinth, and it had an introduction by, I want to say, like, Neil Stephenson, some big sci-fi writer of yesteryear. I'm sure he still has a fan base. I'm not ragging on that particular writer. I just don't remember specifically who it was. Anyway, it was basically like, you're going to read the best thing ever. It is like something that totally, like, it just, at this, like, foregone conclusion that this is going to blow your mind is, like, so obnoxious. And, like, it doesn't add anything. It's just, like, restating the legend that already drew you to this book in the first place. And it's kind of disappointing when you see someone who has, obviously the analytical capacity to say something more interesting about a book, to just be like, this celebrated author is really good.
Yeah, the only thing I ever want from it is context within the author's work. So, like, I recently read that chess story by Zweig. Michael, I know you read that. Have you read that one before? Dan,
yeah, I loved it.
Okay, and that intro, as you were describing it, I remembered that intro placed that. Okay, but it's the last thing he wrote, and then him and his wife killed themselves. You know what I mean? Like, so it's like, I mean, that's worth knowing. Quite interesting. And I never read intros. But then I go back and read them. And so, like, as I went back and read them, I mean, that was like a punch of an ending there, but that placed his work in a broader concept, not just the tragic ending, but, like, overall, like, where he was in terms of the time of war, obviously, because he was, you know, a Jew in 1940s, you know, Germany or whatever, you know, so it placed everything in kind of a great context, and that makes it interesting. But just saying like this book is going to blow your mind, like,
I mean, that was like that particular detail is the only about it being the last thing he wrote. Like that, for some reason, it felt like it enriched the reading experience for me, because like this metaphor of, I mean, chess is this metaphor. I'm going to do the thing that I was like saying is totally lame and stupid. Chess is this metaphor for something that I figured out. No, but like there's a sense that you get through the novel that is like a character that's overwhelmed by the infinite possibilities that exist within a finite system. And like it's so easy to say that as like the finite system is language, the infinite possibility is like the act, you know, starting to write anything. And there's this like weird paralysis that character experiences where he's starting to wonder like how even connected to reality is anything that I have devoted this like so much of I built my entire like sanity around it, like my whole conception of life as being tolerable to live, and yet does it relate to anything real? And I think that you had tweeted, or there's some drama about, no, it was in your review. You were talking about like how he's remembered now and not being like very critically regarded. And there's something strange. I mean, there was a resonant, I don't always read into biographical details, but there's something weird about that where you feel like this person was like super, I mean, he's in this destabilizing moment in his life. Mm-hmm. There was starting to question, like, why am I doing anything that I'm doing? And it really, I don't know, there was something uncomfortable about like the easiness of that. Like you could just like kind of plop this whole existential crisis of the main, or one of the main characters, like onto the writer himself. And yet there was some like me being ignorant enough of things not to have, there's still a little bit of mystery in between the reality and the fiction where you can kind of imagine different dynamics that he was trying to express. Although I did immediately try to read something else after that, and it was like a semi-historical work, and I fucking hated it because it was like so, like it was like before World War II, everything was great for everybody. Like,
well, I agree completely. I agree completely. I mean, I think it's impossible not to, you know, look into the life once you see something like that. But I thought the same thing when I read that article about how disliked he was or he was loved in every language but his own, which first off is a great line. But there was something to, it just added this other element of the writer that I started to see this kind of like annoying quality to him, even though like he's long dead, you know, but I like attached to this kind of like, you know, the theory chess guy, like that he was just kind of going to be like, well, this is how it should be done. And like other writers are going to hate him, but he was secretly this genius. I mean, I did all that stuff with him.
Yeah. He was trying really hard. Okay. Really hard. What did you think?
Beg your pardon?
What's next?
Did you have oh, sorry. Yeah. Why don't you go next for the
me? I'll do a weird what do you call it? Like a weird narrative device, and that's Revenge of a Translator. Have you read it? Like it's told all in the footnotes, so you don't actually see the novel, you just see what the translator's talking about, and he's basically complaining about the novel and complaining about the writer and doing all sorts of weird and wonderful things in the footnotes.
It's wonderful. I love that book. You should definitely read that book. I mean, it's really, really like delightful. That's the word and I really want to ask Emma Ramadan if she messed with the translation at all. Don't you want to know that?
There is a thing at the back talking about how
Oh,
he found out that Emma Ramadan's translating it into English, and he hopes that she doesn't mess his story up and all that kind of stuff. But they do play with that a bit in the back of the book.
That's cool. Yeah, because the translator and author of the meta text is the coolest part. That's the part that I remember is the little like back and forths that they're having.
Yeah, even though you don't see one side of a story.
Yeah, that's a great one. That's a Deep Vellum one too, isn't it?
I believe so. Yeah.
All right, then I'm going to say one.
Publishers. Oh, here we go.
Have you read this one, Rafi? The Wasteland?
No.
All right.
Who's that?
The title sounds, but I haven't read it.
I think we talked about this one at one point because I think it was like, I said it was like my second favorite book last year that I read, and I just described it over and over as the weirdest book, and it was the weirdest book. This is an Icelandic writer, and so this is a topology. Is that the name? Okay, yeah, toponymist. I don't know if this is a real thing, but it's somebody who studies why things are named the way they are, or studies how to name things.
That's a real thing.
Sounds real, right? Okay, all right. Well, he is deep in the wasteland of Iceland, and it starts off. He comes out of this wasteland area, which is just as rugged, I guess, as you can imagine, and his leg's been bitten off by something. And then the rest of the book is the closest doctor was a veterinarian, but who also kind of wants to be a novelist and is going to use this opportunity as her springboard. The rest of the book is the vet's half medical account and half novelization of what occurred to the toponymist while he was in the wasteland and what animal could have possibly bit off his leg. Like, so the whole thing is just like so fucking weird. You know what I mean? Like, because you're like, what the hell is going on? And then at parts you're reading like almost like very purposely dryly written reports. That's like, this is the way that his tendon undid the whatever, and due to the tundra, in this part of the world, it's really, really weird, but it's great.
I remember like trying to order that book.
You remember you got bored of it?
No, I tried to order it. It's like really, it's too expensive to get to Australia, and now with COVID and postage, I'm screwed.
So is it gotten more expensive?
Yeah, it costs about the price of a book to get a book here.
I like Deep Vellum a lot, but I'll say this year is the first year I did a subscription. And of course, the first year I did a subscription, there's already like 2 English titles and 1 young adult. Oh, and a long poem. And I don't like poems, young adults, and I don't really read a lot of...
Don't like people.
The next generation, they're lost cause.
I think all generations are.
Yeah, because they're all
people. People are the worst. You got a book, Dan?
Okay.
Let me go get while Dan gets his book.
Wee. No, that's not the one I wanted. So this was like the biggest hit of my real life book club.
You made it. Yeah, I had that on my list ready to talk about.
Translated by Heather Cleary.
Mm-hmm.
I'm glad I have a fellow madre in the house to talk about this book with, Michael. Yeah, it's just it's one of those books where like the very first thing that struck me about it was its like sense of humor. It was just like so over the top from the get-go, and in this way that's just it matches my sense of humor well. Like it's set in this sanatorium, supposedly for all different forms of illness, and for whatever reason, the people running this place decide that they are very interested in this concept of consciousness after the head is removed from a body. Like, what is that consciousness like? What do they see? Do they perceive some greater truth, some cosmic beyond? And it just keeps getting I'm not big on, like, I don't believe in spoilers generally. I know, Michael, that you're not a fan of them. But like, I sincerely, the joke of it getting so like more and more increasingly ridiculous is just so, it was so great to me as a reader. Like, I really don't want to tell people how fucking crazy it gets.
Review. How do you review it without spoiling it?
And then, like, so, basically people are getting decapitated left and right for no real apparent reason. And it's all happening there's this very charismatic, apparently, person working at the sanatorium who's able to, like, sell people on continually escalating this to, like, a more and more absurd degree. And then the second half of the book is this, it feels much more, or it's like, it's more present, it's more grounded in a present, recognizable type of reality. It's kind of set in the art world, which is, of course, rife for critique for being, like, overly conceptual with no actual substance. And so it didn't strike me as much upon first reading, but then I just kept thinking about it more and more. And the part that I liked about it the most was that whole the parallel that's being drawn between science and art, and just saying, like, all of these disciplines is just what you can sell people on to, like, give you money for. Like, if I can like hook up some system to, like, shock a dead foot and it sells for millions of dollars out of the Met Gallery, or I just said something that probably makes no sense. I don't think they do it at the Met Gallery. But anyway, you know what I'm saying. Like, the high art world, like, it's all like the super high concept. Some rich person paid $1 bajillion for it. And it's like the parallels between those two things is like, oh, it's absurd at first. But then, like, kind of the more you think about it, you're like, huh. Like, Thomas Edison tortured an elephant for no reason to show that his way of using electricity was better. I mean, I guess that's just how it all is.
Have you read this book?
What book is it? I tried to figure it out as I came back. No, I have not.
It was on the BGBA, I think.
Was it? I have not read that book. I know of that book, and I have not read it. I should. Did you both have it picked out for tonight?
Yeah, we both had it sitting here waiting.
Impressive.
This was not planned. We are twinsies.
We didn't tell each other what books we were going to pick.
Well, now I'll definitely have to. Yeah, no, I have not.
And we also did not do this deliberately to exclude you, Derek, even though it might seem a power move that I'm pulling as the guest. Michael.
Why not?
What did you think, Michael, though, of the book overall?
It's been so long since I've read it. I feel like I need to reread it. It's one of the books that you want to come back to over and over again because it is weird. It is wonderful. There is a lot going on there that you could probably pull out.
It's really fucking funny. I think it's like my not mature sense of humor, but done in an intelligent way. It's like, oh, if I was smart enough, I could write a funny novel like this. But they did it. Roclair K, you're my man. Who's next?
I should go.
Yes, you should.
Another Emma Ramadan translation. This is a love story, but the lover and the narrator don't have a gender. They never tell you the gender, so it could be considered non-binary, or you could try and work out a gender if you feel like it just plays with that whole concept of who's masculine, who's feminine, who's what part of the relationship they are. It's just trying to pull it apart. Like, gender plays such a big role in our literature, and having no gender, it could mean anything, and you try and work out hints based on their personality or what they do, and then it throws you off later. I think there needs to be non-binary literature.
What is like is there a story arc that this is like playing off of, or is it just like, how does that that ambiguity tie into what's happening?
I think it's just the relationship developing and falling apart and all that kind of thing is the narrative, but just not telling you anything about these people is what makes it interesting. Yeah,
I was looking up the word for it. Sorry. Oulipo? Is that how you say it?
Oulipo.
Oulipo, okay.
It's a literary, I think, who was it that created this literary movement?
I thought it was Perec. I mean, that's who is most associated with it.
Yeah, speaking of definitive reviews, Derek has the definitive review of Life a User's Manual. Check it out.
That's when I thought we were going to be quarantined for just a short time.
It's like, now you don't have a life, you can read other books.
So that movement was about putting restrictions on, right? So
yeah,
Binks in the original French, her restriction is there's no gendered words. Is that how it?
Yeah, there's no gender for these two people, and because French has very gendered language, like gender plays a big role on how you say a sentence, she has to work around trying to tell a story without giving away those genders.
Yeah, and I think that part's important because I think it's more of it's an incredible achievement in that language. Specific, like it doesn't, for some reason in English, it doesn't sound as, but in that language, it's incredible to think of like not ever using a gendered word,
Yeah, because you can't do something like eat or drive, but you've got to work out a way how to describe a situation that's happening without giving away any gender.
That's a good one. I'm gonna go back to South Korea. This is Me Book and Me by Kim Sagwa, translated by Sun Hee Young. This is the 2 Lines Press one. So this is extremely weird because it's written. B and Book are both characters. Another character is Glasses, and then Me is the young woman, so like high school age woman who they're just experiencing their reality in a city that's not Seoul in South Korea, and that's kind of like the only important part because everything about the book is kind of like it would be different if we were in Seoul, and we're not in Seoul. First off, it was kind of cool because you read all this translated literature, and then you realize that so many of the like things that you end up reading are in capitals or large cities. And there's so many people that feel just like I did growing up in the South, like that it's not I've been to New York City twice. You know what I mean? Like, and when people think of America, I'm sure they think of New York City, but they're not thinking of me, And so there's a lot of that like identity with the geography, and as someone who reads the world, that's interesting. But also the characters are just super weird. They're named B, Book, and Glasses. All Glasses does is he lives in a cabin by the sea, and he reads all day long. He's like our character. And he's got a relationship, like a friendship with this older hippie dude who tells him what to read, kind of like he gives him books and stuff like that. He's like, you should read this, you should read that. And so when they kind of fall into Glass's life, he's only annoyed because there's like people that are around that he needs to like help. When he's like, I'm just trying to read here, you know, before you two girls showed up. But anyway, a really weird book. And it's got like, I don't like to make a lot of like connections with authors in the same country, you know, because I don't read enough. You have to read so much to know. But it does have that sort of similar, like, surreal weirdness, you know what I mean, that I've read in other South Korean works that I find interesting, that it's like there seems to be a thread of that for whatever reason.
Yeah, often I think it could be, you know, what people perceive as publishable, or you know, seen success of a certain style, then they assume more from the same region would, if it's similar enough, might, or maybe I don't think you can ever underestimate to, like, there is sort of this literary pipeline that exists where you start getting published in like prestige outlets, and that allows you to get a publishing deal and you know, all that kind of stuff.
That's a great point, because certainly there's literature movements in America and everywhere that are happening, you know, whatever. I mean, the same types of books that came out of America by Gen X men in the late 90s were pretty similar thematically, you know, so.
They were all the same man.
Yeah. There was like 3 of them. Volman, you know, or a couple of them.
Yeah, that's what sitcoms talk. There are 3, all personalities are divided into 3 types. They form a tight-knit group. They go through some, you know, the entire human experience. All right, I'm gonna pull one. This one, The Carnivorous Lamb. This was a birthday present actually this year, by Augustine Gomez Arcos, translated by William Rodarmore. Yeah. And it is a fun romp for the whole family about.
You read it to your kids.
It's about gay incest and Franco's Spain, and not in a realistic way. This is like not in a realistic way in so many ways, because in some sense it's like this gothic family drama. You know, there's this family, they're come from a significant degree of wealth, and yet within like the new Francoist world order, they're just sort of this effete relic of prestige that they used to be. And there's this, you know, the whole brothers loving each other thing could be read as some sort of political solidarity thing. And that's definitely explicitly in the text to a degree where, like, the mother is so disgusted with the way society has ended up post Franco. Like, she's actively cheering on her sons to like become gay married. Just as a big fuck you. But they do love each other, and that's important. And there are butterflies, and there are like teachers and priests made fun of, which are always, they seem to be like popular targets of any fascist, like, country has been through a fascist period. Those are like the you know, sticking to the authority figures type thing. And it's just like such a, there's no sales pitch for this book. Like, it's very explicitly, you know, making a kind of heartwarming narrative out of like some legitimately fucked up ingredients. There's no way to resolve those 2 things into like a heartwarming whole, but it does end with a wedding. And yeah, I don't even, it has a really good sense of humor. I mean, it's clear that the author had satirical intent. I think predominantly their career was in, theater, I want to say. I mean, it's apparent from the introduction that not much is known about him personally. Like, it's written by a personal friend of his, and he wrote it when he was in like kind of self-imposed exile living in France because he was a gay person trying to make it by in Spain at the time, and was just like, yeah, no thanks. And that's the whole reason why he had an artistic career in the first place, is because he was living in France. So there's like all these interesting ingredients kind of percolating around. And you really, if it speaks to you, I think you will greatly enjoy it. And if not, I think you can safely give up and be like, you know what? I tried one of the best books ever written, and I wasn't up to
it. You said it was a gift. What's that say about that relationship?
It says that they know me very well.
I love that description of like taking something, all the fucked up ingredients, and making something heartwarming out of it, you know, like, because that's the job, right, of art and literature. It's like this impossible task. You can't do it. And then if the love story feels true while you're reading it, then that book kind of excites me. Do you know what I mean? Like, but it has to work on that level too. Like, it has to actually feel like you kind of genuinely want them to be together. You know what I mean? Like, that's the only way, like, as you're describing it, I was like, I can see this working if it really gets that good. You know?
And like, I hate sentimentality. I hate love stories in literature, generally speaking, because I have no soul and I'm dead inside. But like, I think this novel like cleverly gets away with it, because it's like it's not really an acceptably heartwarming tale. Like, no one's gonna say like, "Oh, good for you," about them ending up together, given everything that happens leading up to it. And it kind of feels like a funny joke or a trick that the author was able to like stick the landing on. I just got to give him props for that. You know, it's legitimate respect.
You said that wrong, Dan. You meant to say that your life's so good that you just want to read people suffering.
That's what you say.
It gets boring, you know, here in Utopia.
Yeah, you've already got a good life. You don't need to read about a good one.
Are there even good books about good lives? Like,
I don't want to read them.
Their life is the reward. They don't need a story about it.
You just live it.
Yeah.
I guess maybe that's what beach reads are. Do you have beach reads in Australia? I know you have a beach.
We have beach. They're normally about crime, right?
Oh, they are? Okay, yeah. Beach reads here, I think, are normally about like a vacation home, right? And a large family. Okay. Or there's Nicholas Sparks. That's North Carolina, the actual state I'm in. He does romantic beach reads. Like, so you go to the beach with your family, but then you meet someone.
Yeah, I've never heard of that author.
Bless you, sir. I still remember this, like, this is probably like too obscure for anyone to care, but like, there was this completely unwarranted Nicholas Sparks like hot take on Cormac fucking McCarthy, of all people. And he was being interviewed, and he was like calling Cormac McCarthy like nothing but I don't know, like populist. You could probably find it, and
that's incredible.
When the Lit Bros start feeding upon each other, it's an ugly scene. You don't want to.
I love the idea of Nicholas Sparks coming at Cormac McCarthy. That's great. All right, Michael, you got one for us?
Well, since we're going more weird, has anyone read Notes of the Crocodile? On a Crocodile.
I need to.
I do want to, but I have not yet.
Yeah, so basically the concept is gay people are just crocodiles in human clothing, and your secret's out, Dan. Yeah, so the whole concept of the book is like segregating the straight people with the queer folk and how much they have to suffer and how much what they have to go through life and just be mistreated and pushed in the directions they don't want to go in and all that kind of thing. So, warm and fuzzy.
When was it written? Like, what era is it?
I do not know. It's from Thailand, I think, or Taiwan. I have to look at the inside. 1994.
Jeez. Not 100 years ago.
Yeah.
Still relevant today.
Yeah.
What is the crocodile metaphor like? What is a crocodile life like?
Like a symbol for people not being the norm, not conforming to the requirements of life that they expected to, and not falling in love with the opposite sex and getting married and having that kind of life. And so they're outsiders to society.
Yeah, that's kind of the reputation that I know that author for, is being gay and sad. And it is definitely warranted and proven by many life circumstances. I'm still gay and sad today, so. Here in Utopia, even.
That's the kind of book you want to read, right?
All right, I've got one. I reviewed this one really recently. I read it really recently. Bodies of Summer by Martin Felipe Castanet, translated by Francis Riddle. Have either of you heard or read this one?
I have not.
That one definitely caught my interest when you reviewed it, but yeah, I haven't read it.
Yeah, it's weird. So we're in the future, and now you don't have to die, sort of. You can upload your consciousness to the internet, and then if you can afford it, you can buy a body to put your consciousness into. So there's a lot of like, what is existing questions kind of going on, between the physical, the mind-body problem. But, honestly, what makes it so weird is there's this great concept, and it's fantastical sort of science fiction, and it makes you think a lot about like kind of how gross bodies are, but also like, if you had this choice, what choice would you make? Because not everyone, even that can have the means, chooses to do this. So it has a new emphasis on dying and what that means, because dying kind of feels like an affront to other people. Maybe the way that we sometimes look at suicide, maybe like now, like that's kind of what that feels like to people if you choose to not upload your consciousness, because you can upload your consciousness but then not get a body. So if you choose to not upload your consciousness, like you're saying, like you really are like pull the plug forever, and so that's a very transgressive act in this world. So that part is obviously weird, but another weird aspect is how straightforward the actual story is. It just kind of becomes a revenge fantasy between two guys who used to work together and they didn't like how things ended up. And I think when I first read it and even reviewed it, I kind of didn't like that aspect, because I was like, whoa, what a weird rote sort of story to tell through this. But I keep thinking about it, so I think it actually works, and that's what makes it work, is that amongst even these huge philosophical and psychological questions, we're really just very petty people, you know what I mean? That like ultimately are kind of like, that person was mean to me and I did not deserve it. And so I kind of like it more now than even when I reviewed it, because I like what it said about who we are, like instead of saying something really big and grand, it said something kind of truer. And that was weird, because you expected it to go, the setup is so science fiction-y, then why are we getting just again like two coworkers, like one wasn't super nice, one did something shitty to the other, and it's like, well, because that's the stuff that kind of matters in our life. Like that's the stuff I obsess about most days, is like petty little things like that. Anyway, it was really good. I liked it.
Yeah, I'm all about that petty shit. So
yeah.
Especially the contrast between this like super high concept thing and then like what you were saying, you know what, we might be disembodied, like consciousness is floating in the void, but you're gonna fucking pay for that shit.
And it was like over 100 years ago, so there's something like in the real time that it happened, so there's something so like fascinating about this little grudge you held on to, you know what I mean? Like,
I'm going to find whatever the like disembodied consciousness version of that scene in Showgirls is, where I like throw the beads on the stairway. And I'm going to do that 100 years later.
That's an old
really good. I'm having an obsession with death too. I like death in literature. So I liked how this one, the different choices you could make, like I thought about that a lot. I think uploading the consciousness, you got to surf the web, like in a very kind of similar way to how you can now, but like it seemed like you could do it really fast. So like for maps, for instance, you could kind of like float through a map and see a whole city, but at any different time. Anyway, I ended up leaving it, deciding I think I would just do the floating consciousness thing and not buy the body. The body seemed like it was just rife with problems. The floating consciousness was enough of an existence where it felt like there was enough content to probably keep me busy.
That's another interesting sign of like that there was enough to think about in the book, that you're like actively thinking out your decision process. Were this absurd thing to actually happen? I'm definitely that kind of guy.
That's another 100 pages too. So that's another like, when those are the things that stick with you, you're like, all right, that was effective. That's pretty good.
All right. I'll do one more. I think we'll probably, I don't know how long we're going to do this, but I can't go without mentioning Sesa Ira, translated by Chris Andrews. And this one was remarkable to me, not because it's even my most favorite Ira book. It's the first one I read. And I love him overall, just his willingness to do whatever the hell he wants and somehow feel like he kind of has a point. I mean, even when it's not, I've definitely read some better and worse in terms of like a rewarding reading experience type situation of his. But this one got me. And speaking of like weird experiences, specifically because there was like a preview chapter, like the very first section of it was available for free on LitHub. Never heard of this guy. No conception of what the book is about. Just decided to check it out. And it's all centered around how someone, the author, on his 50th birthday, shortly thereafter, has a conversation with his wife about how like the phases of the moon work. And he's like, oh, isn't it funny? Like, we're taught in school that it works this one way, but that can't be true because there are observable facts here happening before us. And his wife's like, no, that's not how it works. Like, it's a spherical object, light hits it at an angle, only part of it is illuminated, three-dimensional objects. You see them all the time. The moon is another one. It's not a mystical orb floating in the sky. And it's like it's this decentralizing experience for him because he's like, I'm 50 years old and this is like one of the most obvious things in the world that all can see and behold and ponder. And the funny thing that he says is like, it wasn't that I never thought about it. It's that I thought about it once, settled on my conclusion and never thought about it again. And before reading that passage, had the exact same conception that was how the moon worked. And I learned a thing from reading this. And it kind of started me on this existential spiral of like, I don't know shit. Like, and now I have kids and they're asking about things all the time. And I'm like, I don't know. And my son doesn't even believe me half the time when I answer thoughtfully a question that he specifically asked me. And it makes me question whether or not my answer is legitimate. So it continues to resonate with me, despite the fact that I remember virtually nothing about anything beside that very first section. It dives off into some like very tangential seeming notions of history and what we are and aren't paying attention to, and how time and perception works, and all that good stuff. But that first part was like just enough to win me over, and it still sticks with me. So every time I'm getting cocky about anything, I just like, oh yeah, I'm dumb.
Have you read that one, Michael?
I haven't read any Sanatorium.
Oh, really? I love Aria. I could do a whole episode on Aria. That one did not work for me at all. I do love that opening bit, and that is really good. But Aria has a writing. Do you know like his writing style, like what he does? He won't edit as he goes, so he'll write himself into problems, but he has to write himself out of the problem for every book. So every book, and that's the way that he like upholds a type of stream of consciousness. With if you read one, you immediately can see what he kind of the style. But he claims that he does not edit. Like he'll edit for grammar, but like not the story. And he will just start writing longhand and finish the thing. They're all very short. And because of that, some of them are incredible and some of them to me are terrible. I didn't like Birthday at all. Episode in the Life of a Landscape Painter is like probably his most famous. I hate it. But the Literary Conference is one of the best 5 books I've ever read, and I think it's the best book on making art that I've ever read. And it's like 90 pages or something. And then other people read that one and they're like, that one didn't connect with me at all. So anyway, just he's an interesting writer for that reason, because they're all so short. They all flow. It's kind of hard to read him in more than one sitting anyway. Like you should sort of read the whole thing just one time through.
Yeah, it has this like weirdly low stakes feel to it where you're like, oh, it's not that long, and it has like a specific concept that it's going for. And if you, for some reason, like, with some writers or like, weightier tomes, it's like, you feel like if you didn't like something, it's really a reflection on you, or like something inherent in the text itself. But it's like with that whole background about his writing process and the fact that it is like it's kind of like a story. You don't lose that much out of reading an Ira book that you didn't end up liking because it was a quick experience. Probably there was something that caught your attention a little bit about it throughout the way. And it really starts to feel more like this like personal taste type of thing where there maybe is a book by him for anyone, like there's enough weird ideas that get tossed out there at some point that they might just coalesce into something that like hits your buttons.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I think that's a perfect way to, I mean, to me, like there's like half an hour, like right now my wife and I are obsessed with Schitt's Creek. We're watching the show obsessively. And but I'm not like a big TV person, but like some episodes I just don't like at all. And I'm like, okay, I mean, I still like the characters, but there was nothing funny here. And then some episodes you love, and then I couldn't explain why or anything. And I kind of feel that way about some Aria stuff. It's like, I mean, it only takes like an hour and a half, you know what I mean, of my time. And it's like I consume it, like you said, low stakes. But then, I don't know, there's always something there. And the ones that do hit, they feel like they were yours. They were sent for you, and that part's pretty cool. Yeah. He's weird. That style is weird. He always shows up in the Nobel Prize, like odds makers stuff. You know how like in Ireland, they'll bet on anything because they're really drunk. Yeah. So they have odds every year for like the Nobel Prize for literature. And he always shows up at like 25 to 1. And I'm like, I mean, I love Aria, but like that would be such a weird Nobel Prize. Like this guy who writes stream of consciousness, 80 word, and like he writes like 6 a year. I don't know how many get translated, but like it's constant. You know what I mean? Like anyway.
Surely that's better than Murakami winning.
Yeah. Surely, yeah, I think so. Yeah, it's got to be.
Surely it's better than Hanke winning.
Oh my god! Yeah. I said before, but I mean, I want Dasa Drendick. I want them to take away the rule you have to be alive and just give it to Dasa Drendick, since she's my latest obsession.
Yeah, I read her for the first time right after that, and there's like no. I was getting more and more furious, like as I'm reading that book and learning about the specific political situations he's like lending his credibility to, as both a public figure and someone who's like actively producing allegedly non-fictional works about those events. It's like, yeah.
And she's so unsparing, like with everything that she tackles. You know what I mean? That like there's no, like her voice is so braver than his, in my opinion. You know what I mean? Like that's the voice to listen to. Like if you read them side by side, you'd be like, no, she's right, he's wrong. And I like that. Like,
and it can't be, but the Nobel isn't awarded posthumously, unfortunately.
No, it can't be. You've got to be alive. And so I put up my, I think my guesses were for this year, Lydia Davis was one of them. I think that's a pretty decent one. And then who? Crash and Harakai. I could see that one. I think those are my two big guesses. You have to think of like living authors that have had a huge, but then Handke, like I've never even read anything, so I don't know. There's probably some weird European white dude that like that they all love that I've never read. So
you know, Margaret Atwood's going to win it.
That's too popular, though, isn't it? I think it's too popular. He's like a philosophical living. I guess it would be so boring if like DeLillo or somebody won. I mean, like we've let go of that generation, haven't we?
Oh. Nobel is finally taking a stand against cancel culture at 2020.
We'll probably run out of time, but are there any others you want to quickly mention?
I want to mention one other one real quick. The Hole.
The Hole, yeah. I need to read that.
By Jose Reveltes. This is translated by Amanda Hopkins and Sophie Hughes. So this is 67 pages, and it's tiny. It's like a pamphlet. It's all one paragraph. And actually, the introduction is 30 of those pages. It is someone that's literally in a hole in jail. And you kind of have to, like, so he's a leftist, he's an anarchist in real life, and he in real life goes to jail and is in the hole during that time. And so that reality, kind of like we were talking about with Chess Story, even though that wasn't one of the weird ones, but that reality is on top of you the whole time as you're reading this fictional piece. But there's nothing like being in somebody's head like that is in that kind of captivity. It's very, very good and very weird. And yeah, so it works for me in the weird literature. You should read that one.
What about you, Dan?
Let's see. Oh, well, I'll just say quickly, I can't really do her justice, but San Shui, she's my lady, queen of weirdness in contemporary literature. You heard it here first. Translator Annalise Finnegan Wasmoen. This one I didn't like as much as Love in the New Millennium. I know you weren't a fan of Love in the New Millennium, Michael.
I need to read more of her books, but I didn't like that one, no.
This probably won't be sufficiently different from Love in the New Millennium for you to like it. So maybe try her short stories or something more different than this. But she's... well, the one thing that sticks out to me the most about this book in my memory is that there is this constant sexual tension between so many characters, and in both explicit, metaphoric sublimated all these weird ways. Like everything is attention and it's all kind of sexual, and yet no one has an orgasm in this entire book except for one man while he has a vision of like a frosty mountain peak. And he has the single orgasm of this book, thinking about a giant mountain. And she definitely she loves to play off this feeling of tension she creates. It's always this like ultra heightened, but you're not really sure why circumstance. And in this novel in particular, it explicitly deals with characters who are readers and how weird reading is as a life pursuit. Like why people continue to do it, what they actually get out of it, why they choose to do that over anything else, including the other relationships they have in their life, like spending time building and fostering those. And the characters are constantly sort of, their consciousnesses feel like they're overlapping, and they're always trying to read into one another, like, what the hell is this person thinking? Why are they acting like this? And something about translating that process of it, like literary interpretation, into like real life relationships makes you realize how strange reading is as a process, of like how separate or maybe compartmentalized it can be from the other facets of your life. So yeah, she's definitely, Sanshui, definitely worth checking out. I bet a lot of people will not enjoy it, but if you do, you probably will take the experience to heart, I guess.
Well, I've only read her short stories, and I think that's a great way to experience her, because what we were just talking about with Arya, like with a short story, you can obviously do, and her short stories have done the same with me, where some of them I just like, they don't work. You know, she's an experimental writer, and then some of them like totally nail it, you know, and there's definitely no one else like her working right now. But I've never read a novel of hers. That one sounds pretty good, though. Yeah, I'll do that one.
I'm surprised no one mentioned this book.
I have that on my bookshelf. I haven't read it yet.
I haven't read it either. I've read High Rise, which is weird. But High Rise, the problem with High Rise to me, and like everybody who likes Ballard, like I think probably will hate this, but it's too allegorical. It's too perfect, you know, like you're literally climbing the high rise as they like overtake the people that live in the higher buildings because they have more, you know, like I don't know. It's just like, it's good, but I don't think, you know, this goes back to what I was saying sort of in the beginning about weird. Like weird things happen in that book for sure. Like things that if you saw in real life, you would be like, that's the weirdest thing I've ever seen in my life. But narratively, there's nothing weird about a lower class trying to climb up a high rise to execute the people at the top. I mean, damn, that's like, isn't that the most, that's like most media. Unfortunately, we can't sublimate it to be a reality. Like we won't actually do that apparently ever, but it is most media. I mean, like, you know, but for whatever reason, like in America, at least we decide that like our reality should be being Darth Vader instead of like actually understanding the nature of the story. Anyway, that's a
that is reality.
Did you like Crash since you've been the only one that's read it?
No. It's weird.
He's having sex with cars, right? Isn't that what we're doing?
It's about people that are getting aroused by car crashes. So they go around crashing cars to get hard-ons and have sex and stuff like that. You know, normal stuff.
Yeah, very normal stuff. Yeah.
Just like whenever I hear about the concepts like that, I'm like, interesting, but it sounds like so much work. Like
I just see so much pain.
Gotta steal a car.
There's got to be some traumatic thing happening in the background. Do you know what I mean? That's all I think about. It's like, what happened when that person was 5 involving a car crash? You know what I mean? That like stuck with them.
apparently I just like weird sex stuff because I had Tampa here as well.
Yeah, you do just like weird sex stuff. Yeah.
What is that one? I've never heard of that one.
It's about a woman that is aroused by young boys. She becomes a teacher and seduces boys that have not gone through puberty.
At least
It's based on reality.
I've heard such things happen.
Yeah. But like the whole concept is like all these boys fantasize about sleeping with their teacher, but they don't understand they don't have the maturity of a sexual relationship and just how much that fucks with their personality and their upbringing and their life.
So there's like an equal representation of the teacher and the young boys.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. Like they fall in love with her, but she's like, oh, I'm moving on to another guy. And just exploring that relationship and how much that like devastates them. Definitely not mature to have a casual sexual relationship with someone.
Me either.
Yeah. Yeah, it all works out in the end. Everyone who's older and doing that, they're nailing it for sure.
What about this one?
I just finished it. So we were gonna do that one, and I'm actually I don't think that I could do a whole review on it because I didn't really love it. I mean, the concept is interesting, and the first 30 pages propelled himself forward really well with it. And then after that, to me, like I just like, I don't know, it didn't do anything. It didn't go anywhere with it. So do you know the general idea of it?
Yeah. Have you read it yet, Michael, or do you?
Yeah, I read it a long time ago. I just knew that you were going to read it, so I had it here ready.
And you liked it, didn't you?
I enjoyed it, yeah.
I did, so his penis doesn't work, and it definitely doesn't. And how it comes to not work, that story is interesting. But it doesn't do anything with the... It doesn't
how much more you can achieve if you don't think about your penis all the time, though.
but he thinks about it more. Do you know what I mean? Because it doesn't work. So and then he just fights, and then he drives a truck, and then they come up with a plan to maybe make it work again. I found nothing to take away from it. I'll say outside of like, a decently propelled noir, like, that did okay. And I think it's all about how these things are presented to you. If someone had handed me that and been like, hey, this is a pretty good noir, I think you'll like it, then I think I maybe would have. But I had so much more like in mind, and it doesn't do more than that, really. Like, it just has kind of a funny, silly, concept of how he becomes violent and who he becomes. But anyway, I have Beauty as a Wound, which is that author's like huge book that like I think a real and fantasy history of Indonesia. And I do want to read it. Like, the writer is very good. I think I just did not connect to this story. Like, it didn't work for me. And we were it's we were talking about that narratively thing, like the thing that's weird. Like, it wasn't weird because if something like that, if a trauma like that happened, okay, it seems normal to me that maybe that would stunt your growth, okay? And it seems to me that if your growth was stunted in that way in a hyper-masculine society and world the way he was, that maybe you would lash out and fight. And then it also seems to me that if you wanted to unstunt that growth, so to speak, dealing with the initial trauma would be what the first thing they'd tell you to do. And that's kind of like the story. So narratively, it doesn't do anything to surprise. You know, like I don't know. That's how I felt.
History has already shown us that there is no length that men will not go to achieve male enhancement. So, you know, the extinction of entire species of animals.
Yeah.
Nothing's off the table from the get-go. So it's kind of like the premise is humorous for sure, and it did catch my attention. But
it's got one of the best titles ever, too. Like, I mean, I won't deny that. I mean,
is vengeance actually achieved in this novel? No spoilers.
No, you have to pay cash.
Vengeance achieved. Yes, I think so.
I'll get it anywhere I can.
But vengeance is achieved. All others pay cash. This isn't a spoiler, but it's written on a truck in one point. And that's where it comes up. Which is just, I don't know. I live in a part of the world where like you have to ride a truck, I guess. But it would be really cool. It'd be really cool if I was like the leftist in suburbia who had a big ass truck that said all others pay cash. You know what I mean? That's what I want for myself.
That's like it's like the anti-truck nuts.
Yeah.
There's so many other books we could have talked about. Like, what about Romance with Cocaine? Tentacles?
Tentacle's a good one.
The Devil Came to Town. I don't know if you know that one.
I don't know that one.
That one did sound really cool. I haven't read it.
I'm surprised you haven't brought up Death in Spring yet, Michael, since it's one
Death in Spring. Yeah, that's a good one. I don't have that one here.
I read that one.
I just assumed you were going to do it.
No, I read that one because of you. That was one of your. That was one of the highest I think I've ever heard you speak on a book. One of them, you know. And I loved it. Yeah, that definitely.
Was it weird though?
Yeah, I think it's weird. I think it's pretty weird.
Seems quite normal. Burying your parents in trees and stuff like that.
Yeah, I think burying your parents in trees is weird. I mean, you know, yeah, it's definitely weird. Is Little Eyes weird? Like that Little Eyes kind of has a similar in the vein of like the weird town. You know, I think Little Eyes is weird.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah,
I didn't like Little Eyes, so I didn't include that one.
Oh no, not. I'm sorry, I'm thinking of Fever Dream, not Little Eyes.
Yeah.
I'm thinking of the first one.
I didn't like.
Yes, the one that is really good.
Fever Dream was good, but that reminds me too much of Bolaño.
Yeah.
One Night in Chile or By Night in Chile, whatever it was called.
Bolaño's weirdest book, I think, is Nazi Literature in the Americas. Have either of you read that?
Yes. Actually, I was just talking with Michael about
Never
that.
heard of it. I just bought it.
That's awesome. Yeah. You're in for a treat with that one. That's weird.
It's such a faithfully executed premise for no apparent reason. Like it really is just, it comes across as like academic text of some kind.
Yep.
Excavating various writers aligned with right-wing ideology or movements to varying degrees. Many of which are based on like real people, and it's very strange to hear about a writer for the first time, be like, oh, that's what he was kind of parodying probably in Nazi literature in the Americas. But there's no like why. I mean, he does credit some of the authors with innovating certain things stylistically or establishing certain publication outlets where other more important writers were eventually published or whatever. But, you know, why specifically people that have been used? There's no judgment value given by the text about specifically like Nazi, fascist, right-wing ideology. Specifically until like the very end, and it has for me, this like twist, the final chapter is apparently narrated by the person who's compiling this volume, and then it does kind of give this idea of like what their personal stake might be. And it's just, it's so committed to its premise and like an alienating and yet still, maybe I'm just too much of a Bolaño fanboy, so I won't give up on anything that he writes. But like, I did, I still don't know why. Why does it exist? But it did something really interesting that I still think about. So is that good? I don't know.
Yeah, I like the fact that you as the reader have to bring the projection, like you have to bring that idea of, does it bother you? How does that make you feel? Does it change the art? Does art art matters, it matters when you're using art to propagate a certain belief system, like all those things, like it matters to me, but then someone else might read it and just be like, the way you can enjoy Manhattan or enjoy Annie Hall or whatever, and just say, yeah, here's a problematic person, but I like the movie, and I'm not saying that's valid or invalid, but I kind of invited you to think that way, I thought, as the reader. But it's not like a pleasurable reading experience, because like Dan said, it's really just like lists and companions. And the other thing I found too is like I would be Googling and stuff, because part of it you can put together, then part of it's like totally made up. Enrique Villamatas did something similar with Bartleby and Company, where he does a history of writers who stopped writing for whatever reason. Like, so J.D. Salinger obviously is like the famous American example, but he does tons of them. And most of his, I think, are true. Some of them, I think, are just ungoogleable, if that's whatever. And then there might be some made up. But his at least has a philosophy, which is, okay, we're going to get at why would you, create and then stop. So it's called the literature of no. And it's very similar to, written in the same sort of way and whatnot. But Bolaño, it's more fun to read the Villamatas because it's more fun to read about those stories. But I think the Bolaño thing sticks with you longer because you really do have to ask, like, does this matter? Is this important? It is to me, but like, that doesn't mean it has to be to everyone. And I think that different readers could approach it in a different way. But anyway.
Well, like, why the degree to which I'm like questioning my sanity reading that book, I messaged someone on Twitter who is a professor of literature, and I was like, is this an actual like form that anyone has ever done where they wrote an entire volume with no thesis statement? Like, there's no presented rationale for why all this information is being collected. There's not even like more than a line or two of example from any of the works being discussed. Like, it says, what the work achieved, whatever, but there's almost no quotations from any of these fictional works. And so it really gives you no reason to be invested in it whatsoever. Yeah.
And isn't it interesting too that there's not those examples, because that actually speaks a little bit to limitations of him as a writer. Like, as heralded and everything as he is, he couldn't write or make up like the fake bits. Do you know what I mean? Like, or else you would, right? Like,
those are always, that's like the fundamental, there has, in like the story or whatever, someone gives a like super inspiring speech. You can't show the inspiring speech because if it sucks, then they're never gonna be like, why the hell did everyone applaud that piece of shit? But if you just say that it was really good and it affected people, then you can't do any wrong,
That's true. Yeah, that's a good point. I don't think you ever like get a description of whatever Infinite Jest the movie is.
Although
pro lips.
Yeah. I think that I think the final chapter of Nazi Literatures in America was expanded into like an entire full length novella of some kind.
Yes, it was. And I think it's Distant Star, but I get all of them a little mixed up. Because there's been so many of them. There's a new one coming out next week. Oh, look at that. There it is.
I was just reading, seeing if it is.
It's definitely thematically connected.
I don't know, aren't they all?
There is a Nazi at the heart of that one. Yeah, they all are. I mean, it's all the. I mean, he's writing about the same thing. I mean, except Savage Detectives, actually, the one that we talked about today. I think that actually is the one that's an ode to like his youth and to coming up in an artistic sort of environment and sort of the pretension and the sex and the fun like that I think is and that's why it's such a good start. But the rest of them really are like, I think about, right-wing politics and horror and the killing of women and the way that we abuse and also commoditize everything, like that sort of very similar themes. But
all that good stuff.
All right, so should we call it at 1:55?
Yeah, it's
do it well.
I think we achieved something. I don't know how many people stuck around for that.
Well, it will be forever,
Yeah, it'll be online. And I will link our channels because Dan's coming back to YouTube, right?
Yes.
I am. It's going to happen.
Yes.
Assuming my children allow me to record.
Now, are your children virtual learning, or are they not quite old enough to do virtual learning yet?
They're not old enough. They're 4 and 2. So,
okay. All right.
Yeah, their concept of virtual learning is entirely YouTube algorithm based.
Great.
That's how I do it.
Is Australia virtual? Are you guys allowed to go to school like kids?
Yeah, there are some going. Different states have different regulations.
Okay. All right. Okay. Yeah.
I don't pay attention to the kids.
Yeah, I mean, you have that luxury. Well, it is the weirdest thing that I have. Speaking of weird and ending on that I've ever experienced. So we, my first grade daughter sits in front of a computer screen from 8 until 3, and I just can't. I don't know. I might want to pull the plug and be one of those crazy homeschool freaks. Oh no!
You weren't supposed to experience this until like at least your 20s.
Adulthood.
Exactly.
That's my job, not yours.
Yes. Exactly. Like I'm the one that has to do this, not you. But anyway, whatever.
Yeah. So I will link your channels below, and also the Discord for people that like talking about literature and movies. Join that. And then we're on Twitter, obviously.
Thanks, guys, for allowing me to be part of the conversation. It really is fun to get to have a real life conversation, or as real as it gets these days, I guess. But
it is.
This is as real as I want conversations to be. I don't want human interaction.
This works out perfect for Michael. He's like, "This is great."
Yeah, yeah. I don't have to leave my house.
The floating heads—that's enough for him.
That's enough. I can mute if I need to.
It is so like, I mean, this is why I started wanting to do this, though, is to like have these conversations, because it is hard to find this in real life. I joked the other day to I think to both of you when I was saying, I quit my in real life book club several years ago over a huff about Hillbilly Elegy. But it is true that I've never really found a group, amongst a circle that I'm in or whatever that like is interested in talking about literature in this way, which is like that combination of like take it seriously but also have fun with it. You know what I mean? And also not read Nicholas Sparks or
Damn it! That's what I was going to suggest for the book club.
Well, we're reading Crime and Punishment this month. My copy just got here. We're doing it.
Yes, I've got a copy waiting.
I bought the copy for the translator you told me to do, so
I'm not experienced as translator, so we'll see how it goes.
I'm going to read
it's
it.
Better than
I'm going to read it
better than
in Russian.
Yeah. Read it in Russian, yeah?
Yeah.
Perfect for the South.
Yeah. All right, guys. Thank you so much. This was awesome. It was a blast.
Yeah, we'll have to do it again.
We will. We could talk weird books for a very long time.
We could talk about books. Interesting books. Next episode will be on Nicholas Sparks.
I got a lot of thoughts, specifically about how he's better than Cormac McCarthy.
Excellent. I look forward to it.
All right, guys.
Thank you all.